Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Double Blind Magic Hour, where we cover what's going on in the world of psychedelics. Today, we're joined by Charlotte James. She's the founder of the Psychedelic Liberation Training, as well as a medicine woman and just one of my favorite humans to talk to in the world of psychedelics. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Thank you for joining us, Charlotte.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you too.
So, what's going on? How are you?
I am doing well. I was just sharing with you that I am fresh back from being in Gabon and just finding my way through the integration of expansive, visionary, initiatory experiences in our uh, not always so expansive or visionary existence in the West. Um, so gently re-entering the world and the world of work and our psychedelic community that we have over this way.
Yeah, I mean it's so hard. I found it really hard to go do ceremony, especially when you're with a group of tight-knit people. You had mentioned you were in community, for 7 or 14 days or even longer, and then kind of coming back to your house. I always have this trippy moment of like, oh, all my stuff is like where I left it. And, it's like that Heraclitus quote, like, no man can ever step in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man. But I'm like, this river looks exactly the same, but I am definitely not the same.
That's so funny. I just used that quote the other day in a ritual that I was doing because it's so true. I also always come back and I'm like, I need to purge it all. Why do I have all this stuff?
I always do that too.
Yeah, like I gotta what is this attachment to all this shit in my house, because also I think when you're away, you live out of your backpack or out of your suitcase, but then there isn't a sense of lack. I don't experience a sense of lack in those moments. And then I get back home and I'm like, why do I have all these things, that I think like bring me comfort, but might actually just like be there in a less serving purpose than I thought.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's every time I get back from a profound psychedelic journey, I find that one of the first things I want to do is just like do a spring cleaning in my house, like go through, like I'll spend like 3 hours going through like every single earring I own and be like finding all the backs and like untangling necklaces. There's something about like the physical external clutter that can represent to me like the internal clutter.
Yeah, absolutely. I also grew up in a house, like my mom is definitely a purger, which I think is interesting. Also, one of my greatest allies and medicines that I work with is combo, and is a medicine that I serve, which is like all about purging and clearing out what is not serving you so that you have the space to welcome in what may serve you more. I feel like that's a part of the purging process that doesn't get talked about enough is like, what are you purging out and what are you actually making space for though? Because if you purge, you do eventually reach this sort of like voided out existence. I don't think is super supportive. But it's more so like, okay, if I make room physically or mentally or spiritually, what am I actually making room for? I think both um, but it can be helpful to, in this process, like come into greater contact with what it is that you actually desire and what it is that you actually need. Because then when you purge things out, I think if there's like the openness to the mystery of what wants to arrive, there's also though the risk of like falling back to what was if you're unclear on what it is that you actually want to call in.
I think sometimes, especially in this world we live in, where we really kind of fetishize productivity and like multitasking and being able to do, 500 things in a day, that I can speak for myself that sometimes I reach a point of such acute overwhelm that I feel extremely disconnected from my ability to even like know what it is that I want or that I need. And so, but I guess also that to me is kind of where I've learned that the preparation can come in, because, you know, at the risk of stating the obvious, within the psychedelic movement right now, there continues to be, I think, a romanticization of the trip itself and not the whole ecosystem, the whole process that is preparing for the trip and then having the trip and then integrating. And I can tell you, when I've gone like straight from basically work like into a weekend of ceremony, I don't know what the heck, like I just get there and I'm like, "Oh, I'm overwhelmed." Like the journey is completely different if I've said I'm going to give myself like even 3 days without my phone on,
which is like a luxury.
yeah.
And I would also say in thinking about what it is that we want or desire or need, that can also very quickly get overlaid by messages around like manifesting your,
Mm.
and also when we think about physical space, like not falling into a pattern of consumption, or that it's like not about what do you need to replace the things that you're purging, but that there's also an opportunity in that to like be in a visionary state of like, well, how would I like to feel? Like if I wasn't feeling stressed and anxious and I, like how do I want to feel? If I'm not feeling lonely, like what does community look like to me? And that there's an opportunity in that to also shift our relationship to needs and desires, to be more about how we feel, how we desire to move through our lives, than it is about um, stuff or aesthetic. I think there's also that like there's a hyper focus on like the aesthetic of ceremony and the psychedelic aesthetic, and that can be really sort of clouding um, in terms of needs and desires or wants and like purpose, and how those things can come into closer contact.
Did you know that there is one phase of sleep that almost everyone fails to get enough of? And this one phase of sleep is responsible for most of your body's daily rejuvenation, repair, controlling hunger and weight loss hormones, boosting energy, and so much more. I'm talking about deep sleep. And if you don't get enough, you'll probably struggle with cravings, slow metabolism, premature aging, or even worse conditions. Why don't most people get enough of this one most important phase of sleep? A big reason is magnesium deficiency, because over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium. And magnesium increases GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level, which is critical for sleep. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response system. Those with magnesium deficiency usually have higher stress levels, which negatively impacts sleep as well. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's what makes Magnesium Breakthrough by Optimizers unique. Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind and help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. For an exclusive offer, go to buyoptimizers.com/doubleblind and use promo code DOUBLEBLIND during checkout to save 10%. So for those of you who don't know, Double Blind began as a print magazine, and it's still at the heart of what we do. I spent my whole career as a journalist before starting Double Blind, reporting on psychedelics, cannabis, and drug policy more broadly for Rolling Stone, Vice, LA Weekly, Quartz. I did just about everything in journalism. I worked at CBS News covering breaking news, a major newspaper, small media startups, and if you haven't heard, journalism is in crisis. But we started Double Blind anyway because we believe in the value of good journalism journalism to educate and hold stakeholders accountable. We saw what happened in cannabis. Pioneers who put their lives on the line to get patients access to the medicine they needed, getting left behind because they didn't have the capital to compete in the newly regulated market. We've seen what's happened in mental health care and healthcare more broadly, whereby millions of people are suffering, don't trust their doctors, can't afford proper care, and just don't know what to do to get well. In our print magazine, we feature essays, investigations, photojournalism, and much more by world-class journalists who are going everywhere from the ayahuasca tourism industry in Peru to laboratories at leading universities. We're supporting people like you on their journey with psychedelics, and we're covering this movement as it unfolds. This is all made possible by our members who, in exchange for their support, get direct access to psychedelic experts to help them on their journeys of healing and growth, workshops, and a subscription to our beautiful print magazine. Subscribe today at doubleblindmag.com/membership. Yeah, this theme of stuff and materialism and consumption, so interesting and alive for me right now because I've been reading a lot lately, which has been awesome. Actually, one of the messages I received in the ketamine journey was, "You love reading, do more of it." So that's my integration, is reading. And so I read All About Love by Bell Hooks, which I can't believe I had never read before. So if you haven't read that book, buy it immediately and read it. And I also am now reading The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Muntell, which I also highly recommend. It's a really interesting book, basically about the shadow side or the problematic parts of new agey thinking within this current paradigm, and how a lot of people obviously are suffering and looking for answers, and that has led to the birth of this entire self-help industry of sometimes questionably trained coaches and people on Instagram with advice about life. And, she says, one of the things she says in the beginning of the book is, the slyest conspiracy theory of the 2010s yet might be manifestation. Right? And this idea that, like, if you think it, it will be, or that the universe has some kind of will that is guiding your life, rather than actually the universe, yes, is like arguably an animate being, and indigenous communities have held that framework for many, many generations. But just because the universe is an animate being doesn't mean the barista gave you a free coffee because the universe wanted the barista to give you free coffee, and not everything maybe has this deep sort of significance or spiritual. Anyway, whatever. I'm kind of getting on one because I'm really excited about this book. But in both books, they talk about consumption and this mentality that we have in our culture that, like, if you have a problem, adding something to your life is the answer rather than taking something away. And that often that thing we add can be a purchase, right? Like, I have issues with my digestive system. So instead of going on a 6 to 8 week elimination diet, which is free, and cutting out processed foods and soy and dairy and gluten, and seeing if I have a sensitivity to one of these things, I'm going to buy like probiotics and tinctures and like ginger shots, which I've been guilty of doing, for the record.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I used to work in marketing.
Oh God, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, honestly, I was like, please get me out of here, because so much of our world now is based on convincing you that you have a problem. I also worked in startups, right? And like the classic, how do you get money for your startup is like, demonstrate what the problem is that your product fixes, right? And so that we've gotten in this paradigm of like, I'm going to develop a thing that fixes a problem, which I think is also, I mean, this has been the basis of a lot of conversations around psychedelics, right? Is that, and I think I was operating in this for myself for a long time, was like, there's something broken that needs to be fixed, right? And each journey I'm going to go in and uncover more of the problem of why I can or cannot, or am not accessing, right? That there is this dichotomy of problem and fixing, and that especially the medicalization of psychedelics functions within this paradigm, right? And functions within the paradigm of medicine that we have in in our society that is um, curative, and not preventative. But that like you have a problem and this pill is going to fix it. And that we've for a long time had fallen into the same pattern, as opposed to the curiosity that can come. I think in therapy too, like my therapist has to remind me sometimes when I'm like, I don't really have anything to talk about because nothing's wrong. And she's like, well, nothing has to be wrong. We could just like have a conversation about an explorative conversation about yourself, right? And you could be curious about it. It doesn't need to be anxiety inducing. It could just be an adventure to find out more about yourself and more about your lineage and more about than it is there's something wrong with me as a person and I need to fix that. And I'm going to fix that with this trip. As you said, this like romanticizing of like the journey or the trip being the fix and not what it reveals to you, what the medicine reveals to you, that you then have the responsibility of actually embodying in the way that you interact with yourself and the world around you.
So the reframe is, I'm not going to label it. I'm just going to get curious about it.
Yeah. And I mean, if we look at indigenous communities, I mean, there's multiple paradigms, obviously, where the medicine is used as different medicines can be used as diagnostic tools or are referred to as medicine, right? But then at the core of that there's also this understanding that like you're not doing that for your personal gain necessarily. You're doing that so that you can come back into right relationship with yourself, your purpose, your spirit, and therefore the community that you exist within. Mm-hmm. And so it is like medicine, but not in the way that we conceptualize it.
Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. So to be honest, I've been feeling a little confused with all this reading I've been doing because I've been reading a lot of really people that I all perceive to be wise across the board, and yet they sometimes say contradictory things. Maybe I'm not fully understanding, and maybe there's a compatibility of ideologies that I'm not seeing, but it's like I'm reading a Tibetan Buddhist teacher who's talking about asceticism, and then I'm reading like Audre Lorde who's talking about like eroticism, right? And I'm like, wait, so am I supposed to be having orgasms or am I supposed to just be sitting on a mountaintop? Like, I don't understand. Both? Orgasm on Tuesday, sit on a mountaintop on Wednesday. But at least with some of the Buddhist teachers I've been reading, there is this theme of observation of what's happening without judgment and not labeling things. And one of the things that Pema Chodron talks about in When Things Fall Apart is when you are having a thought, which then creates a feeling, to just label the thought thinking and just to notice that you're thinking, and that we actually get very attached, as makes sense if you think about it, to, feelings and thoughts that bring us pleasure and joy. But that the process of attaching to a thought that brings us pleasure and joy is the same process in which we get attached, perhaps in these sort of toxic cycles, to the thoughts and feelings that, make us feel bad, quote unquote, like putting that in quotes, right? And so we have to kind of observe it all, and we have to be in practice of coming back to center no matter what the experience is. And then we also, have people that I've spoken to that I really love and respect who talk about pleasure as a birthright. And, even within like activism and trying to solve the world's problems, like we should, we deserve to feel good. How do we reconcile these philosophies? How do
I'm
you?
just laughing
I'm
because
confused, Charlotte. I'm confused.
I mean, I think what you're saying is one very important, that like we are in the age of where we have the most access to information and we're like the most unhappy also, right? Like there's this idea that we like, if we have access to more information and more knowing, then we're like better off. And I don't necessarily know if that's real. I also feel conflicted around the hyper focus on pleasure. I was just having coffee with a friend and we were talking about the hyper focus on like living a soft life and protecting your peace, and how those that perspective and existing within sustainable community do not necessarily live well together. Um, and also that, I mean, how long have we been talking?
20
18 minutes, and
minutes.
I have
18
not
minutes.
mentioned white supremacy culture, but I'm going to right now. That part of white supremacy culture, or white bodied supremacy, um, is the right to comfort. And this right to, I deserve to feel good. And therefore, I'm going to make other people, even if it causes discomfort or has negative impact on others, I'm going to do everything that I can to feel good as much of the time as possible. And, you know, having put myself in many uncomfortable situations and um, sits and ceremonies on purpose, I also recognize how deeply embedded that is in me, right? Like, I just came back from Gabon. I was so hyped to like sleep in a bed with a bed frame and sit on a toilet with a toilet seat that flushed and take a shower not in a bucket, but in a hands free situation.
Yeah.
And all of those things are wonderful. And I'm very grateful that I have access to those things. Um, and also that they're not prerequisites to happiness. You know, again, like we have all of those things here. Many of us have access to those things in the global north. And again, in the global north, we're in an epidemic of depression, anxiety. I would really say we're in an epidemic of loneliness, which leads to depression, anxiety, and all these other pieces. So it's like, how have we created a hierarchy of value in comfort and pleasure that actually denies us many other things, right? Like so many people are in this place of desiring community. And part of community is engaging in conflict and engaging in uncomfortable feelings. And then when that comes up, people are like, oh, actually, I'm protecting my peace. So I'm dipping out from this relationship, friendship, whatever, this thing that I perceive as causing me discomfort or is
Yeah.
robbing me of my pleasure. And really, it's like, actually, if you had moved through that, maybe there would be greater pleasure on the other side because you'd have a deeper connection, or you would have found the way to move through the conflict, you know? And so I feel conflicted about the messaging that we've really focused on, I would say, in the global north in the last decade around our birthright of pleasure and our, you know, I don't have a grand conclusion about it, but I do
Yeah.
think it's something that we could be looking at.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps for a bigger or separate conversation. I also did touch on this in the podcast episode with Alnur Lada, but when I was, if you all want to check it out, it's streaming on all the platforms, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, when I was at the land project that he's helping to steward, they have compost toilets there. And, you know, you go to the bathroom in the compost toilet, and then all of that is put back towards the produce and everything that they're growing on the land, which then they serve in the community food hall. And I remember one of the things he said to us was, it's insane that we like, number two, I'm just going to use a euphemism, in clean water, like in the global north. Like when that, shiitake mushroom, the poop, is actually like gold for the earth, and can be regenerated for the purposes of food, and instead is being turned into like toxicity and continuing
And
to.
then we call that progressive.
Right.
And then we're like, we live in an advanced society. And you're like, in what way?
But just in response to the whole debate around pleasure, I think in my mind, when I'm thinking about this conversation around the birthright, people saying that pleasure is a birthright, I'm not thinking about the sort of like clinging that a lot of folks have, and I've seen in myself 100% as well, to like comfort and happiness all of the time. I'm more thinking about pleasure like in a deeply embodied way, that enables us to connect to our power and propel us to do work that feels meaningful.
In my personal experience, the only way that I have been able to access those heights of pleasure and bliss is because I've also gone to the depths of my own and our collective suffering.
Mm.
And so we exist in this reality in a place of duality, right? And frequently of polarity as well. And many of our movement elders, our indigenous elders, have demonstrate that in order to access that joy and that pleasure, you also have to access the suffering and the pain. And when we avoid one, we don't actually reach the other, and so I think that's where I get concerned about the hyper focus on pleasure. Also, we live in a world that's like really lacking nuance because everyone wants everything to fit into a 90-second clip and so like when people talk about pleasure as a birthright, it feels like there's a lacking of the nuance that needs to be included in that conversation of what it is, though, then to access pleasure through pain or through discomfort or, through really challenging our preconceived notions of comfort.
This episode is brought to you by Psyched Wellness. Psyched Wellness is on a mission to bring people the healing magic of Amanita muscaria mushrooms with their product, Calm. If you haven't heard, there has been a growing number of folks who are exploring the prospect of Amanita muscaria extracts in small doses for anxiety. And Amanita muscaria is not a scheduled substance in the United States, unlike psilocybin. So it's something that more and more people are exploring, getting interested in, and it's something that Psyched Wellness is devoted to. There's some things about Calm specifically that are unique and worth noting. So firstly, it's a natural made supplement made with handpicked Amanita muscaria mushrooms. I'm going to say that's important because there are a lot of supplements where you don't know where they're getting their ingredients. You don't know where they're getting their sources. And so it's really important when you're embarking on a journey of taking a new tincture, taking a new supplement, that you really know that you are purchasing a product that is made with care, made with intention. You know where they're getting their ingredients. Some of the benefits are that this Amanita muscaria extract may promote better sleep and may help you wake up feeling more rested without feeling groggy. It also may provide physical and mental stress support, which is something I know a lot of us are needing at this particular moment. So if you're curious about adding some calm to your life, you can check them out at psyched-wellness.com and use code DOUBLEBLIND for 10% off at checkout. I really appreciate you bringing that nuance forward. I remember talking to let's call him a former boss who had a lot of, let's call it quote unquote knowledge around marketing. And he told me that people buy things for two reasons. One, to seek pleasure. Two, to avoid pain. And I think it's interesting to think about this idea that you can only reach pleasure so high as you've gone below to reach into that pain, but that it's almost like this is a semantical conversation as well as a conceptual one, right? Like one of the things I found so illuminating about All About Love is that Bell Hooks begins the whole book by saying we don't even have a definition for love like that everyone has agreed upon and that we're talking about, right? People think love is like fanciful, I'm attracted to you, I want to frolic around with you and have like lots of sex. And maybe that's not actually what it takes to have like a long-term, loving, sustainable relationship. So maybe when we're talking about pleasure, we're talking about two different things. Like we're talking about like this notion of pleasure that's instant gratification that actually is a manifestation of the numbing of the pain that keeps us in the cycle of not getting curious about what's going on a deeper level, is different than the kind of pleasure that I would assume Audre Lorde is talking about that can actually be tapped into as a tool for empowerment, essentially.
Audre Lorde as a incredibly powerful ancestor and leader of movement. And I think also I so appreciate her her focus on love in activism. I think for a long time, I was definitely functioning in the paradigm of like activism as martyrdom, that like it has to be about suffering and pain. And that through teachers like Audre Lorde and others, you really start to realize that, again, even in the lineage of movement work, we have like lost nuance. I think what's their name? Alec Van. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
The trans activist, Alec Van Menon. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. Talks about like, I engage in, or they engage in activism for the trans community because they love their community, not because they hate those that hate the trans community. And I think centering love, in that sense, centering love and pleasure in activism work is very beneficial for not always slipping into the narrative of suffering. Also, that frequently denies the narrative of suffering, frequently denies the multifaceted existence of our ancestors and ourselves, and so in that sense that it's important to center love, but not in this fanciful love equals soft life. My peace is always protected. I don't have to engage in uncomfortable feelings. I don't have to engage in conflict. That all of that is also a part of being in love with the full human experience and not just the parts of the human experience that feel good.
I think I want to wrap this conversation firstly by, of course, we'll give you time at the end to share anything else you want to share as well as where people can find you. But I want to wrap the conversation by asking you a question that you shouldn't need to answer, and that you maybe feel like is pretty foundational when it comes to your work, but that is, I think, important because we hear from a lot of people. I find that the double-blind community is kind of split, and maybe the psychedelic community more broadly is split too around the relationship between activism, disentangling ourselves from this sort of what we might call a problematic or toxic paradigm that's been perpetuated by, the economic system that we're a part of, yada, yada. Like people that really want to engage in these conversations, and then people who are like, just give me the shrooms. Like, just give me the shrooms, man. Sorry, I don't mean to like make fun of anybody. I do understand like if when people are suffering and they read about shrooms and they feel like it could really help them get out of suffering. And that's really the conversation that's been around psychedelics for, within the global north for many decades, is like shrooms help and other psychedelics help people with individual suffering. And there's a lot of individual suffering right now. But I'm interested in how we sort of bridge that gap and how we speak to those group of people who are just coming into psychedelics and really interested in them for like personal consciousness exploration or individual healing, and don't really like maybe just aren't that interested in talking about like politics and activism and collective liberation and decolonization and all these things that you talk about. Like, where do we begin? Why does it matter?
I was in a conversation yesterday with some of the incredible humans that I got to travel to Gabon with, and we were talking about the role of resistance. And some of these folks are absolutely activists as well, who have also been on a similar path of recognizing that maybe the traditional routes of activism of, painting banners and yelling at politicians and marching in the street is not really doing what we think it's doing. And this is not to come for anybody's passionate approach to activism. I think it takes many different ways, many different pathways to liberation. Similarly, there are so many pathways that bring people into psychedelic work, right? There's people who come for healing. There's people who come with a curiosity about themselves, about the world around them. There are people who are coming from a perspective of curiosity around consciousness, and others who are curious about spirituality. And I feel like more and more what I am learning, and certainly learning from the medicine, is that there's a place for all of it. Like, we live in a world of chaos and of complexity, and that there's a beauty in that. At the same time, many of our esteemed ancestors in the world of psychedelics and also activism have shown us again and again that the healing is political, and that it's really difficult when we think about interdependence and interconnectivity to like really compartmentalize these things. And in the psychedelic liberation training, really my one of the values that the training carries is that we cannot achieve collective liberation without our personal liberation. I feel like frequently I myself as well, in my evolution of activism, there have been many moments when I have put my own liberation to the side to focus on the collective, and that hasn't been supportive to the collective, right? Because I'm still stuck in my own cage. And so I am excited for folks who want to explore with the medicine for their personal healing. And I find that frequently with supportive community and supportive integration, that folks come to the place of recognizing that their liberation is tied up in our collective liberation. And also coming into greater contact with their unique purpose and role in this world, and like the way that that can be turned into service towards the collective. So I think, yeah, over time, I feel like I've gotten a little bit softer and less dualistic in my feelings of how activism needs to unfold, why people or how people should be working with the medicine, um, that there's a place for all of it, and it's gonna unfold as it is on a
Mm.
trajectory to unfold already. And that what came out of this conversation yesterday is that resistance is both futile. If you're a Trekkie, you'll get that reference. And resistance is fertile.
Mm.
And both of those things exist at the same time. And so I welcome folks who sit with medicine and become awakened to the interdependence of all things, and that they have a unique role to contribute to this world. And I'm hyped for people who take psychedelics and see music as color, and that's the
Mm.
extent of their experience, right? Because even that is going to shift your perspective on the world. And there's an importance in that too. Um, so at this moment in time, I'm feeling far less sort of gatekeepy around how this movement should be functioning or unfolding. And I'm more interested in like putting my head down to the work and towards community and just like moving forward and doing the thing,
Mhm. Mhm.
without constantly looking up and around to judge and compare and pivot and shift based on what's happening in the greater quote unquote psychedelic movement. So I don't know how much that answers that question, but that's what I'm have been feeling more and more into. Also, there's an exhaustion in like thinking that things need to be done in a certain way. Um, it creates a lot of disappointment and pulls energy from just doing the work and being open to the mystery and how the work is going to unfold in the world.
Mm. Yeah, no, that definitely answers the question and poetically. You referenced psychedelic liberation training. Is there anything else that you want to say about it before we close up for today?
I mean, even just so the psychedelic liberation training came out of a 4-week series that I did in 2020 that was called Psychedelic Anti-Racism. And then I had this sort of this shift um, through a journey and also like through the community in which I took that journey with, that when we are so focused on these dualities and these antithetical mm, perspectives, definitions of things, that we like end up feeding that which we don't want to feed, you know? And that, if we're always focused on anti-racism and anti-oppression, that means that racism must exist in order for my work to exist, right? Like if I'm running the psychedelic anti-racism training, racism has to be present in the world in order for my training to be viable, or oppression has to be present in the world in order for the training to be viable. And so that was where the shift in name sort of arose from, to become what is now about to enter into the 5th cohort, which is kind of crazy to think about, of the psychedelic liberation training. And that it is both a training and like how we support greater equity and access and all of those fun buzzwords, decolonization in the psychedelic space. But even that, like for decolonization to be present, we have to have neocolonization as well. That it's like really a training about life and how we can embody liberation in many, many different ways. Um, how we embody it through our service and our work and just our presence in community. So I'm looking forward to this 5th cohort. I also think that it will be the last time that it runs in this iteration. It's feeling like it needs some enrichment and expansion to be more aligned with how I feel in the world now, and how I feel about activism in the world. And that being said, we start class on October 1st. So if anyone would like to join us.
I don't know if this will air before then, but we'll definitely put your, I think it will, but we'll definitely put your, all your socials and whatnot, and people can follow your work and connect with you.
Yeah. And on a monthly basis, I offer BIPOC integration circles called Kindred Circles with my good brother, Jonathan Quest Brown. And starting in September, Sarah Reed and I will be offering a monthly peer consultation circle. So an opportunity to actually come together as practitioners and talk about the cases that we're working with in our communities and how we can continue to be embodied in our work and lead with liberation-focused ethical frameworks, and how we can lean on community and compassion as we traverse these difficult experiences, difficult and beautiful and incredible experiences that we have in the psychedelic space.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Charlotte. And thanks for your ongoing friendship and support of Double Blind. And I always say this, but I mean it. Thank you for the time and work that you have put into walking your own path to enable you to show up how you do, because it's no small thing. It's actually a big, massive thing that never seems to end, at least for me.
Never.
Never ends. This is the journey that never ends.
Yes, and I feel mutually thank you for always inviting me in for the conversation, and for creating Double Blind and bringing it into the world and gathering the folks that you have to make that vision a reality and continue to be just a really valuable and balanced perspective that I think our space needs. So I'm grateful for you as well.
Well, I think that's all for now. Thanks again for joining, and talk to you soon. Have a good day.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much to everyone for listening. We really, really appreciate your support. And if you want to read some of our amazing journalism on the world of psychedelics, we have so many free articles on our website, doubleblindmag.com. And if you didn't know, we also have a beautiful print magazine that comes out twice a year that you can subscribe to on our website. All of this is made possible with the support of our membership, which comes with a subscription to our print magazine, but also access to a private community of psychedelic lovers, workshops to psychedelic experts, discounts to our classes, and so much more. So we hope you'll consider supporting our work at doubleblindmag.com/membership. You can also check out that link in the show notes. If you want to hear more conversations like this one, you can check out the full season of episode 1 at doubleblindmag.com/magic hour, or stream the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, you name it. We're also on all the social platforms at Double Blind Mag. I want to give a shout out to the amazing folks at Human Content who are producing this podcast and helping make it possible. They do a lot of great podcasts other than this one. So if you're into podcasts, you can check them out on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. I want to say thanks so much to all of the listeners who have been leaving feedback and awesome reviews. We really appreciate that. Special thanks again to our guest, Charlotte James. Our executive producers are Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, Shanti Brooke, and Alex Field from the Double Blind team, who also edits the show. Our engineer is Jason Portizo, and our music is by Oma. To learn about our Double Blind Magic Hour program disclaimer and ethics policy and submission verification and licensing terms, you can go to doubleblindmag.com/magic hour. Now let's take you out on Alquimia by Carioca Chandra Edgar.
When the voice of the wind tells truth that nobody can understand, if a spark of fire create the whole planet to shake very intense. When the voice of the wind tells truth that nobody can understand, if a spark of fire create the whole planet to shake very intense. If from deepest waters emerge people of invincible power.
Thanks for watching. And if you're thinking, gosh, I really need more double-blind magic hour in my life, well, you can start listening now by clicking on that playlist button right over there. New episodes are out every Monday, so please subscribe and join us each week on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.